Shalom and welcome to Contextual Bible Study. My name is Denny Thompson. And in this session, we're going to be looking at the second part of the story of David and Goliath. Now, just to kind of refresh to think back about the setting of this story we looked at last time in part one, you can see the Elah Valley kind of in the center. It kind of makes a big bend to the left. And way in the top of the screen to the left is Bethlehem up in the highlands there, up in the Judean hills. That would be the end of the valley, where the valley winds up in the upper part. But then on the left side down in the valley is the Israelite camp and the Philistine camp on the right side. So that's kind of a quick view of what it looked like. And this event of this confrontation is going to be so incredibly significant because whoever controls this valley ultimately is going to control the highlands. So it becomes very important. So on this map here, I've got the Elah Valley highlighted and kind of how it bends its way up to Bethlehem. It's a 14-mile stretch right there. From Gath to the Elah Valley is 7 miles. Of course, Gath is where Goliath was from. And once up there, that's the highlands and that's the heartland of Israel. So it was very important, this whole confrontation. Jesse, the father of David, understood really well, as did others, that if they lost this battle and the Philistine army was able to get up into this, it's called the patriarchal highway on the mountain area, this main area, Israel's going to fall. It's going to be over. Now, in this particular map here, you can see Bethlehem. Jerusalem hadn't been established yet as an Israelite city. That's going to come a little later, but Gibeah was the capital. So this is like critical that they not lose this battle. Very critical. Okay. And there's Bethlehem, of course, the key city in the story. Okay, the story is going to continue now in 1 Samuel. We covered the first part last time, and now we're continuing. Beginning verse 20. Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up, and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. Now that's interesting. That shows how brave David was. He had no problem going right into the middle of a battle, even though he was just a shepherd. He was young. As he was talking with them, Goliath the Philistine, the champion from Gath, remember that idea of champions, the one-on-one big battles rather than the whole army, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now Goliath is called by name only twice in this account in 1 Samuel. 23 times he's called a Philistine or the uncircumcised Philistine. So the authors of the scriptures are not really dignifying this guy even by name. Now the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him, and he will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. David asks the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. Now, this whole idea of shouting out, defying a god, was a great disgrace in the ancient world. It's this whole idea of humiliation, insulting to defaming. He's defaming their God and them both. It was just an incredible disgrace. And even in the scriptures, of course, in the Torah, it says anyone who curses his father or mother must be put to death. So very clearly, this was a great disgrace, a great crime, a great sin. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom do you leave these few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now what have I done? Said David. Can I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to King Saul. Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Now imagine what Saul's thinking at this point. Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear." Now, these wild animals existed in Israel during that time period. And that was a very, very dangerous job of the shepherd to be able to protect his sheep. So that's what David's saying. I can do this. I've done it. I've done this with wild animals. I certainly have the qualifications. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, like one of these wild animals, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord, who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. Now look what he's saying here. He's putting his complete trust in the Lord, very much unlike Saul. So clearly there's a big difference here. David is a hero not just because he's an expert with a sling. He was, but the main reason he's a hero is he's confident that God will fight for him. And obviously Saul was not. Saul did not turn out to be a great king in any sense at all. In fact, he defied God. He did things against what God had said. So Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I'm not used to them." So he took them off. So David is clearly saying, this is not who I am. I'm a shepherd. I use a sling. I can protect my sheep. I don't need this. In fact, you couldn't even walk in this stuff. All right, now let's focus on the valley itself and a little brook that's going to become central, of course, to the story here. Now, this is in the springtime because that's the only time there's water in the brook. Other than that, it's dry. And you can see the stones. These are some tourists that are picking up some smooth stones to kind of replicate the story itself. And the scriptures tell us in the spring at the time when kings go off to war. Now, was this in the spring? We really don't know. I'm not sure it's significant to the story anyway. It might have been, but that's when you would find water. Apart from that, the spring would be completely dry. Now, this is one of those Bible stock videos. This is a great organization. They have these really cool videos, but here's one of them. We're going to go right into the valley, and here we go. The Israelites on the left, the Philistines on the right, and way in the distance, a little bit to the left, up in the hill country, is Bethlehem. Okay, you can see a modern-day Jewish settlement. You can see the white buildings over the top to the left there, barely. But here we go. We're going down into the valley. You can see the trees that kind of surround the brook. The brook is very small. It'll become much more visible here in a minute. And this would have been somewhere right in here where this all took place. Okay, so you can begin to see it a little bit better as we get down closer. And it winds itself through this valley, this small brook, and there it is up close. And this particular picture is in the spring. All right, you see the water barely flowing. It's going to be 5 of those stones, or some of the stones that were in the brook at the time, they're going to be used in this story. So then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Okay, this is what he is, a shepherd who uses a sling. Now, these slings actually are pretty deadly weapons. This is kind of a picture of what probably an ancient sling looked like. Normally, they would use stones about the size of a golf ball, present-day golf ball today, or even up to a size of a tennis ball. Archaeology has kind of proven that. We've learned that from archaeology. And what they do, they put one strand around an index finger, another around their pinky, and they would, of course, sling it over their head and release it at exactly the right time. It took great skill, perfect timing to use this. Now, apparently David did not have any of the normal sling stones. Why? How do we know that? Well, because he chose 5 from the creek bed. And then the question is, why 5? And it's always good when we're reading the scriptures, keep asking questions. That's the Jewish method. That's the Hebraic method. Jesus did it all the time too. Why 5? Well, was he prepared for multiple shots? David had 4 brothers, Goliath had 4 brothers. Was it possible he was preparing for maybe retribution, revenge? Not sure, but he did pick 5. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, we talked about that last time, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. In his own mind, he's thinking, are you kidding me? You're the one coming against me? This is the champion fight I'm up against? He said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with a sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. Okay, this obviously he is just demonizing David here. Now, am I going to kill you? The animals are going to eat your flesh. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. All right, wow, this is incredibly brave. And David has obviously put all his trust in God, and he is making this totally clear because this giant had defied the God of Israel. This very day, I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Now, as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, you can imagine his seething anger at this time, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. He didn't back away, went right at him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone. Now, the ancients knew that slingers were very little threat to an armed soldier. They knew this. Okay, this was known. Because these armed soldiers could easily defend themselves with a shield. In David's case, he had a shield. In Goliath's case, he had a shield bearer with a large shield. Once the slinger was out of stones, he was defenseless. Okay, so the whole idea of him doing this was crazy in their mind. He was like, this is nuts. This little kid has no chance. But now David slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Now, it's interesting that we're told exactly where Goliath is hit. Goliath, interestingly enough, must have taken a quick look over the shield to make sure David wasn't too close yet. During the split second it took for him to look across over the shield, this stone must have arrived precisely. In order for this timing to work out, David would have had to have launched it just briefly, even before he looked, to make this timing work out perfect. So I find that fascinating. There's perfect timing here. Now, David's skill, obviously, because he knew what he was doing, but clearly God was with him, because David had said all along, I represent the God of Israel. I put all my faith in him. And I think God literally helped him release that stone right at that perfect timing to kill Goliath. And Goliath fell face down on the ground. Imagine the reaction of the armies at this point. Now, David is honored not just because he was brave and a skilled slinger, but because he trusted God. And he had said, the whole world will know that there's a God in Israel. This is like a really key phrase indicating what this is all about. In the Bible, there's many examples of God telling his people, his followers, that I am with you. To continually say, I will be your shield in the case of Abraham. Do not be afraid. I will be your shield, your very great reward. And he said this just before God had established his covenant with Abraham. And this happens many, many times in the scriptures. Over and over again, I am with you. And David knew this. Now, David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and they ran. Imagine the chaos. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along this road all the way. So they would have gone. The Philistine camp was to the right, Israelites to the left. The Israelites were chasing the Philistines all the way this direction between the towns of Ekron and Gath. And there they go. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. And you can see the ruins of Gath in the distance there, that they would have plundered all of this area as they ran down, chasing them back to Goliath's hometown. So the Israelites successfully, with God's help, obviously, pushed the Philistines all the way back to this coastline, to these coastline cities. So for now, they were safe. The Philistines were not going to be taking over their country, the highlands, and because of what had just happened here. Now, an incident at the end of the story, David had taken Goliath's sword to Nob. Now, it was likely that Nob was on the Mount of Olives, on one side of the Mount of Olives, and in the custody of Ahimelech, a priest, okay? And he gave it to him at that point. And this would have been overlooking the future Jerusalem. It appears that Nob had become important after the Philistines had destroyed Shiloh. So that's where the sword was taken. Now, there are many, many lessons from this. We're going to look at a couple of these because in this two-part series here. So let's do that in conclusion here. First of all, the Shephelah, remember that's the low hills in the foreground. You can see the higher Judean hills or mountains in the background. And then the coastal plain would be in front of us, towards kind of in front of us. So that would be kind of like the meeting place between the coastal plain and the highlands. So it's interesting because in the Bible, there's so many of these. This meeting place is the center of a lot of conflicts. Obviously this one, the Elah Valley, but many others too. And there's kind of a general application here that to be in the highlands, okay, and the Philistines viewed the Israelite God as Yahweh, the God of the highlands, that even as Christians, to not just obviously associate with Christians and that kind of thing, but to constantly be meeting the coastal plain or the world or the sin in the world, those who are distressed and all of that, by way of the Shephelah. So it's kind of a symbolic thing where this meeting place is very significant. To influence the coastal plain, the people from the highlands had to go through the Shephelah to get there. And that's kind of just a general principle that we're seeing in many of these battles. And as you remember, God had instructed Israelites initially to come into the country and capture the whole country, but they didn't. They didn't capture the coastal plain, and they paid a great price. The Philistines captured that part of it, become their arch enemy. So that was something they didn't do. They were supposed to go through the Shephelah and conquer the coastal plain because that's actually where the international highway was. They could have influenced the world much more had they done it, but they did not. They paid a price. But obviously an application today would be for the church, for the believers, to do just that, to go through the Shephelah into the world, to influence the world through any way possible. There's all kinds of ways of doing that. Obviously, individually, sources of media, it's endless. But that's what God is saying. That's kind of a picture of this here. In this picture, we looked actually before, but in terms of the idea in Exodus, you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Peter picked up on this, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession. Okay, that's what Christians are to be in representing God. But when they do their job, that's when their robes are no longer white. That's when they're busy doing the sacrifices and protecting the people from the skin diseases and all the other jobs that they had that were very dirty, that were very difficult and tough that they had to do. And at that point, their robes got dirty. Now, symbolically, it could be something like this. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Of course, Jesus is saying this. He's teaching this. So, to be involved in the world, to be involved with all the difficulties, our robes are going to get dirty. Symbolically means we're going to suffer in many ways. We're going to be insulted. We're going to have all kinds of things happen here. A clean robe is, just a pure white robe is somebody who's up in the hill country. They're not down on the coastal plain. Or this lesson of how we are individually created, the whole idea of stones versus bricks that we mentioned before, that I taught before. Well, obviously, David was an expert at using a sling to protect his animals. So when Saul tried to dress him up and make him like the other soldiers, he couldn't do it. And obviously, there's a lesson here that we're all individually created, have individual talents and skills and that type of thing. And God's going to work through each one of those. I think that one of the lessons of this story is that. And we looked at this one before, but you also as living stones are being built up as a spiritual house. God's desire for his church, all different, all individuals, all these little stones together are going to make this unified church. But there's more. There's a bigger story going on here. Let's look at David and Jesus. 17 verses in the New Testament describe Jesus as the son of David. This verse, but you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are of old, from ancient times. Clearly a prophecy about Bethlehem and who's going to be born there, of the seed of David. A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Regarding his son, who, as to his human nature, was a descendant of David. So many references to this. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up to David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. Now, this is a prophecy about the coming Messiah. And this is going to be through David, through the seed of David. And remember that when Jesus came down the Temple Mount, the people were shouting, Hosanna to the Son of David. They had expected the Son of David to be like this warrior king. Okay, that's what they thought was going to happen. Hosanna meant save us. All right, and even at that time it was illegal. So they understood this whole idea of the Son of David, but they they only looked at it through the military aspect at that time period. So they had a lot to learn about exactly what Jesus was teaching when he came. Now, both were shepherds, Jesus and David. Okay, so obviously they shared that in common. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. David's rejection by his own family was going to foreshadow Jesus' rejection. And he said, truly I say to you, no prophet is welcome in his hometown. Okay, so clearly there's going to be rejection for us following God and following Jesus' teaching. What about Goliath and Satan? Okay, let's look at that a little closer. These big pictures going on here. Now, if we look at some of the numbers, and I didn't go into this during the presentation, but some of the Jews and the Hebrew scholars look at this and they see symbolism. We did talk about, remember, the scale of armor, clearly that being a picture of Satan. They would look at that as Goliath represents Satan. There are some other things too in terms of sheer numbers. The spear was 600 shekels. He was 6 cubits tall. There were 6 pieces of armor. And they would look upon that as this whole idea of 666. That's another kind of a picture that some people would look at. But the bottom line is Goliath represented Satan. Okay? And we know from the very beginning, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. Now, the Bible makes it abundantly clear that one day good will triumph over evil. The first mention of a future Messiah and his eventual role was way back in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Now, it's very fascinating and very important and totally significant that the stone sank into Goliath's forehead. That's exactly the prophecy that one day, not only was Goliath killed, but Satan will be killed. Now, the Philistines were called, of course, the Sea Peoples, were probably foreshadowing a future beast from the sea of Revelation, which will also be conquered. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ, for the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb. And of course, in Ephesians, Paul said, and God has placed all things under his feet, under Jesus's feet. And he has destroyed Satan by his crucifixion and obviously his resurrection. He has completely overcome the power of Satan. The Son of David's kingdom will never end. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your father, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, who will come from your own body. And I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. So thank you for watching this 2-part series on David and Goliath. And hopefully we've learned lessons of this story. There's so many rich lessons. There's so much symbolism in it. It's such a practical story for us today. So that as we come from the mountains, symbolically the Judean mountains, as Christians, and engage the world in the coastal plain, in that we will have many trials, because that's what happens as we engage the world. But God will be with us. And ultimately, he will provide the shalom that will be something that will overcome the world, that we know he's with us, and that we are trying to do exactly what he's asking us to do, to be a light for him, that the world may know that there's a God in Israel and that the God who runs our life. Shalom.